I hate small talk. I just want to get to the part where we talk about aliens and drugs in the universe already. This sentiment is so common, and although I understand why people are frustrated at this seemingly unnecessary part of human interaction, I hesitate to dismiss something without fully understanding why it exists in the first place. Small talk seems to have three main purposes. The first and primary of which is to help you and your conversation partner find something meaningful to discuss. None of us actually want to be having a conversation about the weather, but these scripts are a springboard off of which interesting topics can stem. Thinking about small talk with the goal of finding something interesting to dig deeper into is a small mindset shift that helped me prevent every interaction I have from turning into a contest of who can come up with the stupidest way to say that it's hot outside. The second purpose of small talk seems to be to express your shared humanity with your partner. There's this great book by Joe Keohane called The Power of Strangers, Connecting in a Suspicious World, where he outlines this issue called the lesser minds problem. The lesser minds problem is basically the tendency of humans to view others as having less mental capacity than oneself, in large part because it's impossible to see the intricacies of another person's thoughts or to acknowledge the nuance of their daily life. For all you know, the person you're talking to popped into existence just before you met them. Showing your ability to hold a conversation helps us empathize with others more, viewing them as complex beings rather than just automatons that drone on about the humidity. The third purpose of small talk is to signal to the other person that you're not crazy. A large percentage of interacting with another human is done implicitly through your expressions, your stance, and your overall body language. In addition to the verbal element of small talk, you're also just trying to get a read on how they carry themselves, and if their bodily cues signal that you should keep talking or run screaming in the other direction. This is especially the case when talking to someone that we don't know. We spend a lot of our mental capacity trying to figure out if someone that we haven't met before has an agenda or if they're genuinely trying to have a conversation with no hidden objective. Those are the reasons that I think small talk is important. But how does one move beyond just shallow topics? There are three tactics that I took away from Joe Keohane's book that really worked for me. The first one is triangulation. This is the process of using something in your environment that both you and your potential conversational partner are already paying attention to. For example, if you're standing in a museum next to someone that seems interesting, comment on the painting that you're both looking at, or ask them what they think is interesting about it. One of the main fears people have when entering a conversation is not knowing what to talk about, so setting the stage with subject matter that has already captured your interest is a good start. The second thing is honest disclosure. In my quest to become better at talking to people, I made one key mistake. I got really good at asking questions, but that's all I did. Leaning too hard into the common advice of just ask questions is a great way for every interaction you have to devolve into an interview. Honest disclosures are a great way to end that habit. Try sharing something about yourself that's personal, not too personal, of course. Humans tend to mirror each other when interacting, so you disclosing something that is potentially interesting will probably prompt the other party to do the same. The third thing is asking the right questions. An honest conversation should be a journey. You shouldn't be conducting what the outcome will look like. Asking specific questions is great, but if it feels like you're leading the person you're talking to in a specific direction, it'll get sniffed out pretty quickly. Ask questions that are open-ended, leaving the door open to learning things that you don't know. For example, instead of asking, "Do you think this happened because blank?" just ask, "Why do you think this happened?" There's no doubt that learning some theory won't instantly prevent you from devolving into meaningless small talk. These things have to be practiced. Also, I'm by no means an expert at talking to people. I still have a long way to go. But here's an experience I had recently that I don't think could have occurred if I didn't get a better understanding of how I sucked at talking to people. About a week ago, I spent the whole day alone working, so I decided to go pick up some groceries. I told myself that I'd try to talk to a stranger while I was out to practice my conversation skills. I walked through the aisles and chatted with some shoppers in passing, but had no meaningful contact with anyone else. I left the store sort of disappointed, so I just started to walk home. It was like 10 p.m. at this point, and it was pretty dark out. But I told myself that if I saw anyone interesting, and if the situation wouldn't come off as intimidating given the time, I would approach them. About halfway back to my house, I saw this dude standing outside a house and bowing down at it. As I approached, he raised from bowing and kept walking. This dude seemed interesting, so I asked him what he was doing, and he pointed into the house. I peered through the window and saw that there was a golden statue of Krishna, the Hindu deity, sitting in view of the window with a spotlight on it. He explained that he was paying his respects as he walked by. In a situation like this, I typically would have left, but I prodded further, asking if he was associated with the Hare Krishnas, who were the religious organization that owned that house. I kept probing and asking more questions, trying to be tactful since I didn't know this dude, but he kept opening up more and more and started explaining his whole life. He told me that he was born in Cuba to parents that were both doctors. The leadership was corrupt, and despite his parents' education, they struggled to get by. He explained that when he was 11, he moved to South Africa, where his parents had much better job prospects. Many days when he got home from school and went to his room in the hospital, there would be screaming patients suffering from gunshot wounds waiting in his room to be treated. He then talked about how him and his family left for the US when he was a teenager looking for even better opportunities. He was a good student and ended up getting a full ride to college. While he was there though, he failed many of his classes, not because he wasn't capable, but because the big questions of life made him anxious to the point that he couldn't focus on school. He dropped out halfway through his degree, enjoyed the Hare Krishnas, because they gave him a spiritual underpinning and answered all his questions about life. This guy had a fascinating story, and I listened, mouth agape, for like 30 minutes. He talked more about his spiritual life and then invited me back to his house to see some of his relics. It was like 11 p.m. and I understand the risk associated with my decision to go with him, but as I mentioned before, a large part of what you get out of talking to someone is kind of getting a sense as to what their intentions are through their body language, and I trusted that this dude wasn't going to chop me up into little pieces at this point. Granted, I also sized him up and came to the conclusion that I'd be able to defend myself if he tried anything, so I wasn't too worried. He lived in a duplex that was immaculate, and the entrance room was decorated with framed images and sculptures of various deities and religious leaders. Depictions of Jesus Christ and Buddha and the Prophet Muhammad lined his walls. We walked through his kitchen to his living room, which was even more jarring than the entrance room. He had a giant table from ancient China that was carved by hand and painted with depictions of waves and people in flowing clothing. On his walls hung antique katana swords that looked to be hundreds of years old. He showed me his bedroom. It was covered in flags from all the countries he visited, and his favorite passages from the Bible and the Quran were on tapestries hanging on the walls. He then asked me if he could show me something, and I said sure. He pulled out a gun and promptly emptied out the chamber and handed it to me. It was a really old weapon. It looked like it came straight out of the Wild West. It was super heavy and left a black tarnish on my hands. I think it was plated in silver. To end the tour, he pulled back one of the flags that hung from his walls to reveal his meditation room. I stepped into the closet-sized space in awe. You couldn't even see the walls. There were bookcases filled with holy books and prayer beads and more incense than my nose could handle. We talked for a couple hours in there about our beliefs and our lives, and although we differed fundamentally when it came to our belief system, it was incredibly gratifying to be invited into someone's world temporarily. I eventually left, and he invited me to come over whenever I wanted. The only tech he had was a second generation iPod Touch, so I couldn't get his number, but he said that I was welcome to come over and say hi whenever I wanted. It would be foolish to expect this kind of payoff from every interaction you have, but I've had much more fruitful and fascinating conversations since integrating some of the lessons I've been learning about small talk. People are weird and idiosyncratic, and they're willing to expose that if given the right prompting. Remember, everyone is interesting, but it's not up to them to show you. It's up to you to discover it.